My mother's name was Dorothea Kirsch, and she lived in a small town called Lauenburg in Pomerania. And her parents had a tobacco store, and my brother's second name is Hans Alexander. And they lived a comfortable life, I know that. And she had one brother, Georg, and I was quite close to my cousin, Lotte. And her brother also had a tobacco store in Danzig, and they did quite well too. My aunt, Anna Kirsch, and I enjoyed her because she was always very nice to me. And many times she called and asked if she could take me to a movie, and she was a very beautiful woman. All our relatives and acquaintances were wonderful to us children. That I remember. We were always welcome, at least made to feel welcome. Whether we were or not, I don't know. No, but really, all of them. I cannot remember anybody that wasn't nice to us, ever. Yeah. Most of our very close relatives all escaped the Holocaust. Thank goodness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we're scattered all over the world, but families intact. My father was George, very handsome man, who came from Danzig, West Prussia. My father dealt with horses. We had a big stable, and he was very, very well known in the community. His sister had a shoe store in Lauenburg, and so she got her brother and my mother together, and they got married. My mother was 28 when she got married, which in those days was quite old. My father was, I think, 39 when he married my mother. My mother was a very lovely lady. She was very pretty, and he liked her. I think she was very German in many ways, you know, like all of us were. They had a very good marriage, as far as I know. My mother had me when she was 28. I had 3 brothers. My brother Hans was about 2 years younger than I. Walter and my brother Peter was the youngest. I had a nanny whom I was very, very close to. I called her Dati. Her name was, I think, Greta, but I guess I couldn't say that name and said Dati, and was Dati from then on. And she was always there for me, always. I had my own bedroom, very beautiful white furniture. I remember, yeah, that furniture was pretty. And my nanny was staying overnight. You know, when my brothers was born, I guess she took care of my brothers as well. But somehow or another, I always considered her my nanny. She was with us for 8 years, and then she got quite ill. And we had another woman that took care of my brothers later on. Her name was Lotte. But they did not interact with us children the way parents interact here in America. It was a typical, upper middle class German upbringing. Manners, number one. Had to have manners, no matter where we went, whom we met, always polite. And I remember being a very polite child. I always felt closer to my father than to my mother in many ways. And he was a very good person, wonderful. I loved him. He was terrific. He was very well thought of. And he was very, very well known in the city. And I was always happy when he came home. Yeah, yeah. We were scared too, we were very well behaved. If he didn't, he was strict. They were pretty strict upbringing. My father was a man who was totally honest, told it like it is, which I do. And my mother was more, you have to like everybody. And I could never understand that. Why, if I don't like somebody, why do I have to pretend? And that's my father was like that. Matter of fact, sometimes it was a little embarrassing, but I appreciated the honesty, you know. I remember one incident, and that was very funny. We were at the temple for the high holidays, and afterwards, we all met each other on this, after we got out of there. And my father, somebody came up to my father. He was a very prominent businessman. Came up to my father, hello, Mr. Boss, Rosh Hashanah, Happy New Year. My father said to him, no, you don't. And the man walked away. And I said to my mother, I said, what was that about? And I don't know, there was something business-wise that wasn't quite right or whatever it was. And my mother was, of course, embarrassed. I walked away when he said that, but my father said, no, I don't like the man, that's all. That's it. Yeah. My father lived with us. It was Opapa. He was a widower, and he lived in a suburb of Danzig. And my mother didn't like that he lived by himself and wanted him to live with them. So from the time I was born, my grandfather was always there. It was Opapa. He was a little guy. He was wiry, very strong, and always smelled from tobacco, and we loved him. Yeah, we all loved him. He was a widower, as I said. He had a girlfriend who was not Jewish. I never met her. And he never married her. And my mother always said, Papa, why don't you want to marry? No, she's not Jewish. But until the Nazi times, when he went, she started living with her daughter, I think. And my grandfather, I remember this, he came home and he was very upset. There was a huge picture of Hitler in the apartment where they lived, and I know that my grandfather said, "He goes or I go." He went another time, and of course the picture was still there, and he left. He said, "That's it." And I know that the daughter called my mother, said, "Please don't let this happen." But my grandfather was adamant. And by golly, he had got himself a Jewish girlfriend. He was 80-something. Yeah. He played gin rummy with my youngest brother, who was at the time 6 or 7, and they cheated each other all the time. It was very funny. But yeah, we had our grandfather with us. We had a lot of culture. My father was an opera buff. He loved the opera. He liked it. And when we were young children, we went to children's opera, children's plays. I remember that. Oh, yeah. We had a gramophone, of course. And we went I remember going to concert in Sopot, which was the beautiful resort at the, right there. They had, they had a military band called Stieberitz. I don't know why I remember that name. I loved it as a child. Oh, God, they were in uniforms playing marches and junk. And then, of course, the Philharmonic, they were also played there. And we went, oh, yeah, we had a lot of music. But we had a beautiful piano. My mother played children's songs, yeah, I remember. Mm-hmm. But she didn't play a lot, but she did play. And if they had a big party, they used to have somebody to come play the piano. They had a big, called the music room. It was a beautiful room. I remember the furniture was very elegant, and they played it. And they had these fabulous parties. He owned, among other things, a movie theater. We went to Baby Peggy, I remember that. But we didn't go as much as here. So we went to the seaside, which was Sopot, very elegant resort. at the beach. There were other resort towns which were very nice. Heuboden. The Baltic Sea wasn't terribly rough. And we were, during the summer, we were always at the beach. We could either take a train or take a tram. My uncle had a touring car for a couple of years, and I always got car sick, so I hated it. Yeah, I didn't use it very much. But we didn't, in those days you didn't have cars. My father had a droshka, a carriage and horses. But I don't remember that much. We went into the lowland because my father did business there with the to sell horses, and sometimes we went along. They asked us to come along, and they served us cake and coffee in the afternoon. He sold it to the farmers, and I don't know, he sold it in Poland. They had a big business. I spent as little time as I possibly could, but my brothers Walter and Peter, they loved it. They were there a lot. One time I remember they were on the roof of the stables and jumped into where they kept all the horse manure, and the driver called my mother and said, "Mrs. Boss, I don't know what you can do about the boys, but that's what they were doing, and they smelled to high heaven." So my mother, the kids were coming up, and they said, "You better stay outside. Take all your clothes off before you come into the apartment." Yeah, but my brothers they didn't get into a lot of mischief, but they did have an old horse called Max. It was an old war horse, and he was a swayback. And the kids loved him. And one time the policeman. He said, "Mr. Boss, I saw your two boys sitting on the horse, on Max." Everybody knew Max, and everybody knew my brothers. They're riding in the city. And my father said, "Okay, let me ask you, do you know if they're riding bareback or saddle?" He said, "No, bareback." He said, "Okay, don't worry about it. Max knows how to get home to the stables, and they will not be able to walk for at least a week, I'm sure." Sure enough, they could bareback, We were not religious per se. For the high holidays, we went to the called the große Synagoge, the Great Synagogue. We went to temple, of course, on the high holidays. My parents fasted. My grandfather always fasted. And my mother told him later when he got older not to fast anymore, but yeah, he did. And we all tried to fast. My brother got quite ill, but I guess I think I fasted too. At afternoon time, early noon, all the children brought flowers to the mothers in the synagogue. The women sat upstairs and the men downstairs, although it was liberal conservative. The whole upstairs was banked with flowers. Everybody had beautiful flowers, that smelled, and the whole synagogue smelled from flowers. It was a beautiful custom. We had always Seder at our home. My grandfather did it. There was a big book, and he used to read and skip pages, hopefully lots of pages. He knew Hebrew very well. He was very intelligent man. He knew fluent Hebrew. The prayer book was always in Hebrew, and Seder, he read from the Haggadah, was Hebrew. When things began happening, we formed a Jewish youth group. And we said to my parents that we would like to keep the Sabbath, to ask my mother to light the candles, And I remember to this day, my mother said to my grandfather, Papa, would you mind if we light the candles and we want you, so we keep the Sabbath? And he said, of course. Yes, but she asked for his permission. Yeah, that's how it was. I never liked school to begin with. Hated it. And I was in a lyceum, and we had 5 Jewish girls in the lyceum. And everything was pretty good. You know, I had lots of friends who were not Jewish, and Jewish friends. I was not a very good student because I was in a private school for 3 years before going to the lyceum. Now, had I gone to the regular school, I would have had 4 years and then come to the lyceum, which would have been better for me because emotionally and otherwise I was not equipped to go to the lyceum, which was very strict, very strict. I never understood physics, math, any of the related, but I was good in the liberal arts, very good. Languages, geography, all that I was good at. Math, impossible. I had to have tutors all the time. I had 6 years of English in school and about 3 years of French. And we learned Hebrew in school. The state had 1 hour of religious study a week for Catholic, Protestant, and Jews, because there was, it was state and religion were separate. And I had a Polish girlfriend, a very nice person. Her name was Fela. She was, I think, already in the same private school I was at, and then later on I think she was also at the Lyceum. And it was in the 30s, and her name was Lipinski, I know that. And her father, I was at their home, which was not in an elegant area where we were. She was a nice, I liked her parents, they were nice. And Mr. Lipinski said to me one day, Laurie, I know your father, he's a very nice man. Please tell him to get out now. We are leaving for Palestine, well, that wasn't those days. And tell your father, he's a nice man, I know who he is. Get out. And I said, Mr. Lipinski, why don't you call my dad and tell him yourself? He said, Laurie, I'm a Pole. And I know your father will not like it if I tell him what to do. Please tell your dad for me, give him the message. Well, I gave him the message. And of course my father said, what does that Pole know? We're Germans. And I thought, aha. And later on, I thought back, I thought, he was so right. Life, was very comfortable. But later on, little by little, you get these insidious things happening. I had a very good friend. Her name was Anna Marie, not Jewish. Very close. She always at our house. We were always doing our homework together, always together. And there was a time I didn't see her. I thought, oh my gosh, what's happening? I called, I didn't get the answer. So I was near my house, on the street, and I saw her. And I said, oh, Anna Marie, I am so happy to see you. She looked at me and spat in my face. I was 14, I remember that. And then I realized, and she laughed at me, and she was with 2 other girls, which I hadn't realized right away. 2 other girls, brown shirt, brown skirt. I remember I was absolutely devastated. That was my good friend. and called her mother. And her mother said to me, Laurie, listen to me, listen good. Do not try to get in touch with her. Don't ever call her. She's now a big Nazi. She belongs to the youth. My son is now in the Hitler Youth. And she said, don't ever try to call again. That was a wake-up call for me, I think. This was the very first incident when I was about 14. That was horrible. I never forgot that. It spat right in my face. She had gotten married, and my brothers didn't need her anymore. You know, they were getting older. And I visited her. She lived in an apartment a little bit outside of town, one of those newer apartments. And I visited her 2, 3 times, bringing her little gifts. And one day, I was there visiting her, and she said to me, you know, she said, people in my apartment building are wondering, what is that little Jewish girl doing in your apartment? And I was probably 14 or 15. I knew exactly what she was telling me. And I remember I was so upset. I said, you'll never see me again, don't worry about it. And I walked out crying all the way home. I was so upset. I think I realized, without knowing, that that was the beginning of the end, you know. Well, it was gradual, very gradual. In school, we had Jewish teachers. I remember one, and all of them, by the way, had to have doctorates in education in the Lyceum. And there was one woman, her name was Dr. Haberfeld. She was Jewish, and I don't remember what grade it was. She was, they substituted the Nazi teacher and sent her to the middle school, and we got this Nazi teacher. Her name was Dr. Niklas, miserable woman. And she came to, the very first time she came to our class. Oh, by the way, the Jewish kids had to sit in the back at that point. And I remember to this day what she did. She came into the class with Heil Hitler, and she went like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 Jewish girls were sitting in the back. And she said, I would like to tell the Jewish girls that, and we had to tell our name, they will not get a good grade in German because they're not Germans. I don't know what made me get up, because I was told not to talk back. I got up. I was very angry, and I said, Dr. Niklas, I'm very good in German. I have always gotten good grades in German. And if I'm good in my grade, I would expect that I should get a good grade. I don't know how I got the courage. I got a good grade. But I went and took a business course at the university. And I remember sitting in the classroom and by myself, and a young woman comes in, my age, 16. And she sat next to me, and I said to her, you don't want to sit next to me, I'm Jewish. She said, what has that got to do with it? I said, And I told her. She said, but I want to sit next to you. I'd like to be your friend. You were not allowed to be friends with non-Jews. But we became good friends. And I was stopped in the foyer of our building. This man said to me, "Who is that girl I saw you with?" This man lived downstairs. He was a big Nazi, big.
In your apartment?
Big Nazi. I said, "What are you talking about?" I knew immediately what he was talking to. I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "You know perfectly well." I remember that to this day. He said, "You know perfectly well what I'm talking about." I said, "No, I don't." "Well," he said, "I can only tell you if I ever see you again with her, there's going to be trouble." Well, I don't know if I took it seriously or not. We saw each other. A couple of 3 weeks later, he saw me again, and he said, "You did not follow my instructions." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "Oh, yes, you do." He said, "Now I will tell you something. If I ever see you with this girl again, not only will you be in trouble, but so will her family." So I knew I had to just break it up. And I called her. She said, "No, that's not right. I'm your friend." I said, "I know you're a friend, but I don't want you on my conscience." I remember that I said that to her. "I cannot have that. We can't see each other anymore," because he really meant it. And that was the end of it. And to this day, I'm sorry I didn't try to find her. Her name was Elspeth Küssner. And I don't know why I didn't try to find her, but I didn't. I guess I forgot some of the incidents you try to forget. But the youth group was our savior. There was no question about that. Because we all became very, very close with one another. And our life centered around that youth group. We went to Finland. I was able to go to Finland. I was 15. My parents didn't want me to go, but one of the leaders of the youth group pleaded with my mother I should go, and they finally let me go, which was very nice. And we had meetings every week. They called Heimabende, and we learned about other cultures. Each one had to take a culture and talk about it at the evening. I mean, it was a learning, actually, very good. We were always together, and we were very, very closely in that group, and that saved us. It was, when I think back, it was our savior, that we had that kind of relationship. And, I mean, all of the youth group became so close. They were like family, and we were always together. We were always in a group. We really had a great time. We used to go to the beach. And then we were designated to have a piece of beach right near the Polish border. See, Danzig was very close to the Polish border, and we all had our passports. Sopot was a beautiful, beautiful, very elegant resort, sort of like Monaco, and right next to it was a border, and there was Ologo, which was the Polish part. So we were told to be at the Jewish beach, which was right next to the border. Well, funny thing, there was a fence, fenced off. God forbid you should contaminate the Germans. So funny thing, what we did, we didn't go there. We went across the border next to the Jewish beach in the Polish part. We would not go to the designated beach. And the border guards, well, they were Germans and Polish, of course, knew us. And we didn't even have to show our passports anymore. They were very nice to us. I mean, they didn't try to keep us back or anything, they just let us through. And after 2-3 times, they knew who we were, and we just showed the passport. And all of the youth group, most of them survived. Scattered all over, but Many of them went to America, many of them to Israel, um, Argentina, Uruguay, and some of them in England, but lots of them in America. As I said, that Jewish group was our savior. It really was. And we were all closely knit because of the circumstances, I think. Well, they were concerned and they knew, but they didn't talk too much in front of us children, don't forget. We were not really, the conversations were mostly when we were not around. It was so subtle that little by little you didn't realize. I mean, I remember that we still had our maid. My mother later on said she had to let her go because she wasn't allowed to work for Jews. I mean, we knew we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. We certainly couldn't go to certain areas. We didn't go, that's all. They had signs, Jew, do not buy, Jew, Jew. Yeah, you couldn't go anywhere. No, you could not. You couldn't go into the stores even. My mother told me that our old laundry lady that came to do the laundry did the shopping for her, to bring her stuff, because they were not allowed to go into stores. I remember, however, we went to the high holidays. We walked to the temple, and a lot of other Jews were, the Jewish were walking the same way. And that, maybe it was the last year I was there, the populace was watching us. They were on the sidewalk at the very edge, and I saw it from the window. And I told my dad, I said, Dad, we're going to get beaten up. He said, no, we won't. We weren't going to. He told my grandfather, Papa, you take the boys on either side, I'll take. And we all went to temple. They watched us silently and didn't do a thing. Now, they also were told by the Gestapo that they would burn the synagogue or something. So they rounded up all the men that served in World War I for Germany. And they told them to go to the temple, form a chain around the temple. They did. Nothing happened. But that was then. Later on, probably it would have happened. My father was a very honest man, and he was very highly thought of everywhere. There was one incident that tells you about my father, how they were regarding him. He was called before the Gestapo, and that was in 1937 or so. And that was a very, very, very serious situation. Most of the people never were seen again. And my father was taken to the police department, and he told us he went through a maze of rooms and hallways, and he thought that was it, And he came in front of a desk, and some man was sitting behind the desk. And he looked up to the man who brought my father to this Gestapo guy, and he looked and he said, "This is Mr. Boss. Why did you arrest him?" And he gave some kind of answer. And the man said, "I know Mr. Boss, you better let him go." That was, I think after that my father realized it was time to get out. Brother Walter and Peter went to England on a children's transport. Walter was 15. And Peter, he was a little over 13 after his bar mitzvah. We knew that was for Joint Distribution Committee in Hayes. They arranged it. And we had a list of children that could go. Don't forget, I was working at the Federation at the time. It must have been horrible for my parents. I can only imagine how terrible. And they got out, and they were assigned to families. My schooling was completed, but if I wanted to go on, I could have for 2 more years. It was like university here. I worked for the Jewish Federation, and oh my God, it was a wonderful job. The boss was belonged, well, he was kind of overseeing our youth group. And of course everybody knew each other, and the woman that used to work there told my mother they needed somebody. And I was apprentice, and I didn't want to leave actually, and I thought, oh. And she said, no, this is a wonderful job, take it. And I did. And it was a wonderful job, but a very difficult job because we had a lot of people come to the temple in dire straits or whatever. And we put together an illegal transport. I don't know all the ins and outs of the transport, but it was done with the help of the Gestapo. And they went to Palestine, but they got stuck in Greece. And Gestapo came to our office. The home of the agent was next door, and they called and said, we'd like for you to know Uncle Sam was visiting us. Well, that was Gestapo. And my boss, he was maybe 10 years older than I, maybe not even, about 10 years, was a dear friend. And he had a German citizenship. We had the Danzig citizenship, which was better. He had a German citizenship. And he said, Laurie, I'm going to ask you, you don't have to do it, but I have a letter, and that's going to be incriminating. If this Gestapo finds it on me and reads it, I'm done for. I was going to mail it in a Polish post office. If you want to do that now before they come, you don't have to, but to me it was an adventure. It was not something that you think of consequences. So I went down, and it was maybe 10 minutes walking fast. I remember looking behind me, and I threw the letter in the Polish post office to the mailbox and came back. Gestapo was there. How come you're late? Germans are not late. If you are supposed to start your work at 8 o'clock, you're there on the dot. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And my boss said, oh, Miss Boss is late on Sundays. She always has parties to go to. And they gave me a big lecture, Germans are never late, blah, 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 blah. And he said, what's your name? I told him. He said, which of the bosses? Franz Boss? I said, no, George Boss. Aha. And he asked me questions. Where are you from? What are you doing? Things like that. I don't remember too much except that I was scared out of my mind. But I answered. And they left. So I said to him, by the way I put it. They said, were you able to do it? I said, yeah. I was mostly typing a lot, letters, and I remember typing German letters, of course, to Hayes and Joint Distribution Committee, asking for funds for the illegal transports. And we had to interview them, and I guess the list went to the Gestapo. And they had an age limit. You could only be so and so old. I think it was maybe 50 at the most. And there was a woman there because she was over the age limit. And I remember this like today. She came to the office and I said to her, you know, we have age limit. I cannot put you on the list. I mean, gee, I was 19 years old, a terrible thing for somebody to have that responsibility. And I talked to my boss about it and he said, Laurie, I just cannot do it. You got to help me here. So I did, and I said to this woman, I mean, you know, there's an age limit, blah, 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 blah. And she was crying, Karen, and crying. So I finally said, you know what, I'm going to put you on the list. To this day, I'm grateful I did that. I'm sure she was able to kind of slip through it, maybe. I'm quite sure she did, yeah. And it was a terrible thing. I know we realized how bad it was. We knew of the concentration camps. We knew about that. And you just try to push it away for every day in order to exist. You can't live with constant fear. Well, there was constant fear. I remember my friends left, and there were days I couldn't stop crying. I mean, I was just devastated. And I was also worried that I might not get out. And I don't know how I found out about what you call the domestic visa for England. I don't know exactly how that came about, but I knew I had to get out. I didn't exactly want to be a maid, but what difference it make? You got to get out. And I was first was a boarding house on Weston-super-Mare on the west side of England. Well, I didn't like that at all. It was a boarding house, and there were nice people in there. They knew I was a refugee, and they were really, but I had to sleep in an attic, and I mean attic. The roof was like this, no insulation. In the same bed with somebody else. I mean, in my life, I never could imagine it. And I wanted to get out of there. I mean, that was... And they begged me to stay. They said, another refugee girl is coming. And I met her, and she said, please stay. I said, no way, I'm not staying. I'm going back to London. And a friend of mine had also made on the same street. She had heard about this young family that wanted a refugee girl as a maid, and I worked there, which was very nice. They were very nice to me. They let me come in the front door, which nobody heard of. The maids had to go through the kitchen door, and they gave me the front door key, which was very nice of them. But I remember being on my hands and knees, putting paste on the floor, on the kitchen floor that was, you know, the brick floor, and had to scrub it by hand. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? And then I thought, well, better than Auschwitz. I remembered that. But they were nice to me. They really were very nice to me. And on my day off, I met other refugee girls. There was a friend of mine. She was, you know, two doors down. And other friends were in England. My very dearest friend was also in England. That was Ellie. That was from Danzig. We called each other the twins. They all called us the twins. And she was also a maid. She was in a fancier place. She was in St. John's Wood, which is very fancy. Upstairs, downstairs maid, and cook. They're all refugees. The cook was from Vienna, and the other two girls from Germany. And I visited her. Yeah, it was strange. I mean, they waited on these people. They didn't... I remember that they wouldn't even pour the milk for themselves. And I was burglarized. I mean, this place was burglarized. And I had very nice jewelry. Every bit of it was taken. And I remember the guy from Lloyd's of London, the adjuster, came. And I wouldn't tell him that I had a lot of nice jewelry because we were not allowed to take anything out. Now, you talk about brainwashing. I realized later on what brainwashing really is. You don't realize it. So subtle. I would not tell him what I had. And I remember the woman saying, the woman I worked for, she said she had beautiful jewelry. She had a beautiful this brooch and cameo, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't tell him. And he said, but this is not Germany. Please, the adjuster, pleading with me. I said, no. And the same thing happened. I was walking with my cousin. They were in England. They were doing very well. And I saw a bunch of young people coming toward me, young men. Bunch, 3, 4, 5. And I walked on the other side. Okay. Second time it happened again. And I started walking on and my cousin said to me, what are you doing? I said, well, she said, Laurie, you are in England. Nothing's going to happen. And I think then I realized I was brainwashed. Mm-hmm. She said, but you're in England. Nothing's going to happen. I was at the home where my brother was staying with these people. And we were sewing blackout curtains right away. And I heard the King's speech. And I remember we were terribly upset, of course. My oldest brother was in Israel and first a Jewish brigade and then the Haganah. He stayed in Israel. Unfortunately, he passed away. He was 72. My brother Walter was in the British Army, and Peter was at the university at the time. Now he's happily retired, a professor in Australia. And Walter came to America, and he was in middle management for, I think, Xerox. Yeah. The secretary had promised it to my father. He had said to him, look, I will get Laurie out. I can get her out, but she has to be patient. I can't get the visa right away. And the visa didn't arrive and didn't arrive. And I thought at the time, well, if I can't get out, at least I'm in England. And my cousins were doing very well in England. I had friends, so it was such a terrible thing. I thought, well, worst comes to worst, I'll stay here. But then the visa came through, and I was just at the nick of time. War had already been declared. I was booked on a Dutch boat through the Bloomsbury House in London, which was a Jewish agency. And the Dutch ship was immediately cancelled. That passage was cancelled. And the ship was sent by the Canadian government to pick up the survivors of the Athenia, which was bombed by the German U-boats. That was torpedo. And the survivors were on this ship that they were all Canadian, that the Canadian government sent. And it went to Montreal. It docked in Montreal. In Montreal, the Jewish agencies have gotten in touch with the Jewish agencies in Montreal. And they picked us up from the ship, put us in limousines, please, with chauffeurs, chauffeured us around Montreal, was from the Jewish temple, I think, or agency. They gave us lunch at the temple. It was, I think, a Reformed temple, and put us on a train to America that same day. And the train went through Albany, New York, where we immigrated. And friends cousins of mine picked me up in New York. I was in New York for a couple of weeks. All I remember is I walked to Times Square, New York, and watched people read the Times. And I remember reading it, but I didn't quite understand most of it. And then took the bus to Los Angeles, stopped at some friends of my parents in Chicago for overnight, and then went on the Greyhound bus to Los Angeles. Dora and Richard Wolfe, very close friends of my parents. I called them aunt and uncle. They were lifelong friends. Lived in Los Angeles. They had two daughters, Barbara, and Ellen. Ellen and I grew up together. So I've stayed with them here in Los Angeles. It was wartime. The Germans had a curfew, but we were from Danzig, and somehow or another somebody convinced the government that we were different than the Germans because we had the Danzig citizenship, and we did not need to honor the curfew. The Germans, everybody had to be at home by 7 o'clock at night. So we were sought after because we could visit everybody. And it was, yeah, okay. My aunt that I stayed with, Aunt Dora, she said, you know, you girls really didn't have a good youth. Well, we didn't feel that way. Yeah, first of all, we didn't know any better. Secondly, we had the Jewish, our Jewish club. We were always together. So we had the comfort of being always with our friends. Mm-hmm. And all our friends were well off. They were all doing well. And we were always welcomed, no matter where we went. So I don't think we felt, I don't know what would have been if the Nazis hadn't been in Danzig and all that happened. You don't know. It is what it is, and you live for the day or the week or whatever. So looking back, I mean, we had actually a lot of good things happen to us, yeah. And I worked here in the household. There was only one-bedroom apartment. Her husband was very sick. Mr. Kahn was very sick. And she was a retired singer, nightclub singer. And she had loads and loads of company. They were Jewish. And I was treated like a daughter almost. They treated me beautifully. But my biggest job was dishwashing. They didn't, in those days nobody had a dishwasher. She had so much company. And I remember forever washing dishes. My girlfriend did massages, and she did quite well, and I thought I wanted to do that too. But I did have a job or two, and I didn't like it. So I took a business course here in Los Angeles, and I was employed at Milton Goodman, an insurance agent. And I was a one-girl office. Well, I remember my English was passable, but not really very fluent. I did not know what an expiration date meant. Well, it's pretty important for insurance. And of course I had my dictionary with me. And what I did do, when Mr. Goodman wasn't in the office, I used to take all the files and look through them to get acquainted with the names and so on and so forth. And I suppose I did pretty well, because after a while I underwrote insurance policies for fire and theft and for automobile too. I remember my salary was $16 a week, which was, I guess, the average in those days. And then he raised me to $18.50. And I stayed there until I got married. And I lived at the hamburger home until I got married. The hamburger home was a place for unmarried Jewish girls, uh, like a Y, you know, and it was wonderful. It was located in in those days, already bad area on Union Avenue, downtown, which was not good. But I think the founders were the original owners of May Company, the hamburgers. Mm-hmm. And there was a home for unmarried Jewish girls. And there were about 50 or 60 girls there. And it was a very, very good thing for me and for many others. I had many good friends that I made there. You had to pay, I think, 40% of your earnings to the home. But it was part of the Jewish Federation. So whatever, expenses there were, the Federation took care of it. I remember going to the Philharmonic, and the hamburger home was asked to usher, which was a great thing because that way we could see operas and concerts and so on. And the hamburger home had the niece of the cantor from Temple Israel at the time. She was living there. So her uncle came to the hamburger home on Friday nights quite often and gave the blessings, and it was a Jewish home. We celebrated Passover and all the holidays. It was very nice. There are lots of very lovely people and lifelong friends. During the war, we served at the USO, and that was very nice. I went out with a nice Jewish soldier to go bowling, yeah. The apartment building was sold. Our friends owned it, very close friends. They lived downstairs. They owned it and they sold it. They had a big furniture store, and they sold it. They also got out. I think they went to England, and they moved, but it was in the same area for some reason or another. And my mother told us that Gestapo came to their apartment, and I don't know what they did or didn't do. They searched. They must have said something. My grandfather opened his jacket and said, "If you want to shoot an old Jew, if that makes you happy, go ahead, shoot me." And my mother said, "I thought I would die." She was scared out of her mind. They left him alone. Yeah, but my grandfather had guts. He really did. I mean, it was amazing. I often wondered about how I would react, but you don't. And then, of course, everything fell apart, little by little. And he had one close friend. His name was Eugen Müller. He came to dinner many, many times. And we called him Uncle. And he came to the house, and he was the one that actually saved my parents. Oh yeah, he came, all of a sudden he had a big swastika. And my mother said, "Eugen, when you come to my house, I don't want to look at the swastika." So he put underneath, okay. But his son became a huge Nazi leader. And he was the one, he sent his son to my father, and he said, "Uncle George, get out tonight. They're picking up all the Jews and sending them to the concentration camp." That's when they got out. And he said, "Don't take much with you because they'll, watch you." So they took just a small suitcase and went to my aunt in Berlin, of all places. But she was still there, and she was able to give them money that she had at home. And he had to be left behind because he couldn't, he was already around 90, I think, and he couldn't, they put him in the home for the aged. And I got a telegram here that he had pneumonia and died, fortunately. Was buried, well, the reason I know that is because he was buried in a Jewish cemetery. That's what the wire said. So I knew that he died a natural death. 6 weeks later, the home was taken into cattle cars. So I was always grateful, yeah. And they bought into an illegal transport that's supposed to have gone to East Palestine. But there was a Greek ship owner, and he had no intention of going through the British blockade, and he dumped them in Benghazi. And from there on, they were arrested, and they were put in camps, and then they shipped them to Italy because the Roman forces were in, North Africa. They shipped them to Italy, and they were in a camp, and they put the refugees in different areas, and they had to go to the police every day to tell them where they were, which was okay. The Italians didn't do anything. And my parents were in Paramonte, and I think it was in the south of Italy. We were able to ride, but during the war we couldn't. I didn't know where they were.
Yeah.
Roosevelt gave an order to pick up 1,000 refugees in Italy, and my parents came over on a ship, and that's how they came to America. Well, they were put in a camp in Oswego, New York, and they were supposed to go back in a year. They had to learn English, the theater. They were safe, at least. And then later on, the agencies vouched for them, Hires, Joint, and B'nai B'rith, I think, all of them. They got visas and stayed, Finally, I got through the Red Cross. They got in touch with me. And I went to Oswego, and they were in the camp, and it was an army camp. And it was very sparsely furnished, but they were here. And I stayed there for about 3 weeks to visit them. And during the visit, when I was there, Mrs. Roosevelt came with Mrs. Morgenthau to visit the camp. And she didn't like the way the conditions. She thought it should be more homey. And my mother was asked to wait on Mrs. Roosevelt for the lunch, and she was so excited. Yeah. And I tell you, Mrs. Roosevelt came, a fashion, you could not call her a fashion icon. And she had a black dress on, I remember. And I remember the refugees were better dressed than she was. Yeah, but she was a wonderful woman. Anyhow, they dissolved the camps and they became citizens. One of my close friends was from St. Louis, Missouri, and Eleanor, Moy had heard that she was living at the Hamburger home. He wanted to settle in Los Angeles. He wanted to get out of St. Louis. He came here, and he heard that Eleanor was living at the Hamburger home. And he dated her one evening and so on. But she told him, I can't date you because I have a boyfriend overseas whom I'm going to marry. She was engaged. But I want you to meet my girlfriend, who was a refugee. And that's how I met Maury. He was very nice. He was a very steady kind of a man. You just don't know what it was. It just felt comfortable is a word, Very comfortable. He was a very good person. and very nice, very intelligent, highly intelligent. We liked each other well enough, and my friends embraced him, and we had a good time. We got married after 3 months. Kent Silverman came to the Hamburger home once a month. I asked if he would marry us, and he did. He married us at Temple Israel. We had a good life, actually. Of course, we not always have, we had fights, and somebody said, nobody had fights. I said, well, you're lying, but that's okay. I'm not lying when I say it wasn't always, everything was hunky-dory. And he was a very good father and a very good husband. We went out, we went to movies, theater, music, all the good stuff. We stayed in our one-room apartment for 2 years because there was nothing available. And then we moved to Detroit Street, and I already had Jackie, and Sharon was born there too. And it was only one bedroom. It was a very lovely apartment. Moy was a pharmacist, came out here to work in pharmacy. Pharmacists did not make a lot of money when we first got married, but later on they did pretty well. He had a brother, Alvin, who was a violist, a very, very fine violist. He was later on one of the members of the Hollywood String Quartet, and he was a member, of the St. Louis Orchestra, and one of his close friends, Felix, was in Los Angeles working in the movie industry, and he wanted Al to come out here, and Al was very, very successful. Yeah, he was a wonderful violist. We were very close with him. I had applied the very next day I came to America. I remember running downtown to file my first papers. It took 5 years. But inasmuch as it married Maury, who was an American, it was kind of coincided together. But I went on my own to get my citizenship. They came here, and in those days you couldn't find apartments or even rooms, and it was very difficult. And they stayed at my brother-in-law's, which was very nice of them, for about 4 or 5 weeks until they found a room. And I had saved up some money, I think $400 or $500, which I gave to my parents, and they had to bribe somebody to give them a room to live in. It was unbelievable. You couldn't find any place where you could live. Very difficult. Finally, they found an apartment, and unfortunately, my father had a stroke, and my mother was working. She was first working in a shoe factory, and then she was working as a caretaker for a while, and all that. So it wasn't easy. It was hard for my parents. We tried our best to help them. We took them to Frank's little Vienna out here, where he could have his Wiener Schnitzel and his bock beer and stuff like that. We tried our best to help them out, but we had no money per se. But we could take them out, and we went to Berry Farm, took them out there, and we took them places and all. We were trying to be good to my parents. My husband got along very well with them. Well, my mother died when she was almost 95, but my father died, he was 78. Jackie was born first, in 1945, a year after we were married. The second name is Leslie, after my grandfather Louis. And Sharon was born when we lived on Detroit Street. They got along very well, the kids, very well. They did, yeah. that was nice. She and Jackie was always good to Sharon and vice versa. And to this day, they're good friends. And the best thing that we did is join Temple Bethlehem. It was very good for the children. They had a wonderful life because of it. They were leaders in Skifty and Nifty, which is the national federation for kids, and Skifty was Southern California, and Sharon was the leader, and Jackie, they were leaders, and I was very active in the temple. I was on the temple board, and you are on the temple board automatically when you become president for sisterhood or brotherhood. And then they asked me to stay on, which I did. And after 5 years they called me, I remember to this day, they wanted me to be on the executive committee, but I decided it was time to get off the committees. It wasn't easy. And then I started to work at Kaiser, and that was another very good thing for me. My husband was a big chauvinist, oh my God. He didn't want me to work. And I did a lot of things in the community, a lot. And I enjoyed it, but I felt I needed something else. And Jackie had gone to law school in San Diego, and she dropped out after a year. She didn't like it. And at that time, Kaiser hired her, and for the insurance department and the legal, she did some stuff. And she called me one day and she said, "Mom, we're really short on help in our department, but things were different in those days. Could you come and help?" I said, "Yeah, if I get paid. I want to get paid when I work in a place like Kaiser." She said, "Of course you get paid." So I was there on a temporary basis, and I liked it so much that I wanted to stay on. And she left. She got her master's degree in city planning, and she became a city planner in Culver City. And I stayed on at Kaiser and stayed there for 20 years. We always had Christmas parties, and they always have. Everybody made something. And most of the time we made chicken, or we had usually turkey. And one day my supervisor came and said to me, "Lori, I have to talk to you. We're going to the girls decided to serve ham for Christmas." I said, yeah. She said, "Well, the reason we're telling you now, because Carol, who was another Jewish girl, but didn't belong to the temple, she was Jewish, isn't coming because we're serving ham." I said, "Well, it's okay if you serve the kosher ham, that's fine." So after about an hour or two of that, 2 hours, I'd see little groups talking and looking at me and talking. So the supervisor said to me, "There's no such thing as a kosher ham." I said, "Of course not." And she said, "Carol isn't coming." I said, "What are you talking about? What do you mean Carol isn't coming?" "Well, she's not religious. What's the problem? There's other things that are being served, lots and lots of other." She didn't want to come. I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, besides which I like ham. But yeah. My husband was crazy about Truman. And I at that time couldn't see it. I was for Roosevelt. But we were always Democrats. And I always worked in every election. I did a lot of political things. I did a lot of political things here, and I was in downtown a lot. All the people, the city council all knew me. I was down there a lot about our Valley Village and all that kind of stuff. I was always interested in politics, and I was always volunteering for, I remember running around for Red Cross and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And through the temple, I became active, and social action was a very important thing for me. I was fairly sure Hillary would win, but all the shenanigans that he did, obviously, and then, I mean, I was shocked, absolutely shocked. And I knew that was going to be bad, but I didn't realize how bad. I was glued to television when they had all the things that were going on. And I mean, it's like a deja vu now with Trump. It's a horror. It's a horror. So I don't know what's going to be, but I'm very upset over this regime that we have now. Terrible. Fortunately, all my friends feel the same way. Absolutely. Absolutely. He's a dictator. But he's stupid. I mean, this is a really stupid man. And when stupid men in high positions, they do a lot of harm. Well, I'm very worried. I'm hoping things will going on. Who knows? I'm not very optimistic, but I'm trying to be optimistic that the right will prevail eventually. But yeah, well, of course I have concerns. Valley Village was Valley Village before the war. They changed it and annexed it to North Hollywood at the beginning of the war. But I knew that it was a different name at one time, and we researched it. And Valley Village was an entity. They had a Chamber of Commerce. They had all kinds of stuff going on in this area. And I approached Joel Wax, who was our councilman, and talked to him about it. And he said, well, work on it, and so on and so forth. And another man and I, another man from the community and I worked on it. And he brought it to city council and said that it had been an entity, but he wanted to enlarge it. It used to go up to Magnolia, but he wanted to enlarge it to south side of Burbank Boulevard. And it ends on Whitsett. And this was about 20 years ago I did that. It's a big advantage because we are in a very good area. Some parts of North Hollywood are very bad. They're not good. So it was a very big advantage. And as soon as we changed the name, the values went up. It really did. So now, of course, we are very well known and all. And then other communities saw that we changed our name, and one of them was Valley Glen, which was very nice. I enjoyed it. I didn't like to be stuck at home. That wasn't for me. And this is what I liked. I guess I don't know how it happened. But I guess you become politicized through our youth group in Danzig already, because these were all leaders. I mean, many of them became rabbis and leaders and all that. So I think it evolved through that. I know that I was working for the Federation, and I think maybe because working in that environment made me be more aware of things. I'm quite sure that's what it was, because I know I did many things at the Federation that was very it was very interesting. I went to the College of Jewish Studies and became a religious school teacher, certified religious school teacher. A Temple Ahavat Shalom in Northridge called me, and I was there for 10 years teaching second graders, and I really did like it. And I remember I was, but I taught maybe not quite traditionally. I taught certain things to the children. I had the second graders. You have to teach it a certain way, and I became Best Teacher of the Year award, which was a big surprise to me because I have to. This is a very funny thing. I had to teach the children about Passover, for instance, and when I told the children slaves, that Jews were slaves, in Egypt, kids don't understand what is a slave. They don't know. 2 years. I mean, they all were raised, in the good middle class, upper middle class. So I thought, well, I have to have them. I have to do something. So what I did with poor little kids, I had them take the chairs, put them on the tables, take them down, put them on the table, take them down. It made terrible noise. And the kids finally said, "I'm tired, Mr. Dinkin." I said, "Go on, do it." So one of the children said, "You're so mean." I said, "Never mind." I did it for a few minutes. I saw the kids got very tired. I said, "Okay, get down." I had cookies. And I said, "Okay, now how did you feel?" And they told me. I said, "Okay, do you now understand maybe what a slave was like?" And I thought, sure, I was going to get calls from parents. Didn't get one call. And I told my principal about this, and he said it was fine. Okay. Yes, we did go back about 12 years ago or something like that. My sister-in-law from Israel was there with her 2 kids. And everybody from here went too. It was difficult. I wasn't feeling very good, and I think I was more emotional than anything else. It was difficult. But Danzig is now Polish. It's not a German city anymore. They annexed it to Poland. And everybody was wonderful to us when they heard that we had come back. I had come back. And I remember going to a bookstore, and I said to the bookstore when I walked in, they could speak either German or Polish or English, most of them did. I said to them, "I'll buy the book providing it has a synagogue in it, that our old synagogue, which was destroyed." He said, "Yes, it does." I said, "Well, you show it to me." And he did. And then he thanked us for coming back. They bombed Danzig quite heavily. A Polish architect, a woman, found the original drawings or whatever, and they rebuilt the old cities the same way, which was fabulous. And they renovated and rebuilt a couple of churches. We went to this restaurant, Polish restaurant. We had our nice dinner. And after we paid, the owner came over to us and he said, "I want you to wait." What's he calling, police? Or what's he doing? I thought, what is this? Instead, he came with a big tray of schnapps. He wanted us to thank us for coming back. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my God, why am I brainwashed thinking, differently? And we took the little train, took about 20 minutes to go to Sopot, still there. Just, Sopot was not destroyed. it was a very good trip. But there was no one there that I knew, of course, no one. And many of them I wouldn't want to even say hello to anyhow. But people were extremely nice to us, very nice. And they all thanked us for coming. I don't think I felt comfortable. No. We went to Ireland after that, and I felt fine there. Yeah, I remember that I did not feel 100%, and physically and mentally. I guess it was definitely tough to come back. And I think we did achieve quite a bit, all of us, all of us. Yeah. My husband was a very hard-working man, and his family was very important. So that was wonderful. I think my grandchildren are really wonderful people. They've been brought up a certain way. I think they have been brought up to be good people. They're sensitive, I think. They really are. See how my grandchildren act, and very important. And my children, you know, what kind of people they are. That's important. They're good. That's it. They all have good friends. And I think it's very important to have a lot of friends, good friends. And we had very good friends. We had a period where we had really a bad situation, I mean, certain things, and our friends were extremely supportive. So I think friends are very, very important, and family. And Jonah's married to Stacy, very lovely woman. And Jonah has 2 children, 2 little boys. Jamie's married to Paul, very lovely man. My little namesake, Laurie. Baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna make you apple pie. If you don't like apple pie, we're gonna make you raspberry pie. You like apple pie? Have a wonderful family. They're there for each other, you know. I was happy when I'm with them, and we have a great time. So we're very fortunate.